Lee Harvey Oswald. November 22, 1963. Dallas, Texas. A date that changed America forever. President John F. Kennedy, the youngest man ever elected to the presidency and the first Catholic to hold the office, was riding in an open-top motorcade through Dealey Plaza when shots rang out that would shatter the nation's innocence. Kennedy had served just 1,037 days as president, but his impact was immense. From the Cuban Missile Crisis to the Berlin Wall, from the nuclear test ban treaty to the Alliance for Progress, JFK had navigated some of the most dangerous waters of the Cold War. His inaugural words still echo through American history: "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." At 12:30 p.m., as the presidential motorcade made its way through downtown Dallas, Lee Harvey Oswald positioned himself on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Using a mail-order rifle he'd purchased for just $19.95, Oswald fired 3 shots from that window. The third shot struck Kennedy in the head, killing him instantly and wounding Texas Governor John Connally. But who was Lee Harvey Oswald? A former Marine who had defected to the Soviet Union in 1959, only to return to America 3 years later with his Russian wife. He was a troubled man, a communist sympathizer who felt rejected by both American and Soviet society. After the assassination, Oswald fled the scene, took a bus, then a taxi to his boarding house. About a mile away, he encountered Dallas police officer J.D. Tippit, who had been alerted to be on the lookout for a suspect matching Oswald's description. In cold blood, Oswald shot and killed Officer Tippit with his revolver. Police captured Oswald at the Texas Theater at 1:45 p.m., but America would never get the answers it desperately sought. 2 days later, while being transferred from his jail cell, nightclub owner Jack Ruby stepped forward and shot Oswald dead on live television, silencing the assassin forever. Ruby claimed he wanted to spare Jackie Kennedy the pain of a trial, but conspiracy theories have swirled for decades about whether there was more to the story. The Warren Commission concluded Oswald acted alone, but questions remain. What drove this 24-year-old drifter to commit the crime of the century? We may never know for certain, but one thing is clear: those 3 shots in Dallas changed American history forever. John Wilkes Booth. April 14, 1865. Good Friday. The Civil War was finally ending, and President Abraham Lincoln should have been celebrating. Instead, he would spend his final evening at Ford's Theater watching a comedy called Our American Cousin. It was there that America's greatest president would meet his tragic end at the hands of a famous actor consumed by hatred. Lincoln, our 16th president, had guided the nation through its darkest hour. He preserved the Union, freed the slaves, and delivered some of the most beautiful speeches in American history. From the Gettysburg Address to his second inaugural, Lincoln had shown that democracy could survive its greatest test. But his vision of a reunited nation would die with him that night. John Wilkes Booth came from America's most famous acting family. Handsome, charismatic, and talented, he was a major star on the American stage. But Booth was also a fierce supporter of the Confederacy and an outspoken racist who despised Lincoln with every fiber of his being. He had volunteered with the militia that executed abolitionist John Brown in 1859, and as the war turned against the South, his hatred only grew stronger. Originally, Booth had planned to kidnap Lincoln and exchange him for Confederate prisoners. Throughout the winter of 1864-65, he gathered a group of conspirators and developed elaborate abduction schemes. But as the Confederacy collapsed and Richmond fell, Booth's plans turned deadly. He would destroy Lincoln and his top officials in one coordinated strike. On the morning of April 14th, Booth learned that Lincoln would attend the theater that evening. He quickly assembled his team. Lewis Powell would attack Secretary of State William Seward, George Atzerodt would kill Vice President Andrew Johnson, and Booth himself would murder Lincoln. Only Booth would succeed in his mission. That evening, Booth entered the deserted theater around 6 p.m. and tampered with the door to the presidential box, ensuring it could be barred from the inside. He knew the play by heart and waited for the perfect moment, a line that always got a big laugh from the audience. As the crowd roared with laughter, Booth slipped into the presidential box, drew his Derringer, and shot Lincoln in the back of the head. Booth then struggled with Major Henry Rathbone, leaped from the box to the stage, and shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis." Thus always to tyrants, Virginia's state motto. He had broken his leg in the fall but managed to escape on horseback. Lincoln died the next morning at 7:22 a.m. For 12 days, the largest manhunt in American history pursued Booth across Maryland and Virginia. Finally, federal troops cornered him in a tobacco barn. When Booth refused to surrender, they set the barn on fire. A single shot rang out, whether from Sergeant Boston Corbett's rifle or Booth's own hand remains unclear. America's most hated assassin died on that farmhouse porch, taking his secrets with him. James Earl Ray. April 4, 1968. Memphis, Tennessee. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. stepped onto the balcony of the Lorraine Motel, preparing to go to dinner before a rally supporting striking sanitation workers. The 39-year-old civil rights leader had no idea that a racist drifter was watching him through a rifle scope from a boarding house window across the street. At 6:01 p.m., a single shot rang out, and America lost its greatest voice for justice and equality. Martin Luther King Jr. had changed America through the power of nonviolent resistance. From the Montgomery bus boycott to the March on Washington, from Birmingham to Selma, King had awakened the nation's conscience and forced America to confront its original sin of racism. His "I Have a Dream" speech at the Lincoln Memorial in 1963 remains one of the most powerful moments in American oratory. At just 35, he had become the youngest person ever to win the Nobel Peace Prize. But by 1968, King faced new challenges. The civil rights movement was fragmenting, with younger activists embracing Black power and rejecting his philosophy of nonviolence. The Vietnam War was tearing the country apart, and King's opposition to it had cost him support among some allies. Still, he pressed on, expanding his mission to address poverty and economic injustice through his Poor People's Campaign. That's what brought him to Memphis to support African American sanitation workers who were striking for better wages and working conditions after 2 workers were crushed to death in a garbage truck. King saw their struggle as part of the larger fight for human dignity and economic justice. James Earl Ray was the perfect opposite of everything King represented. A small-time criminal, Ray had spent his adult life robbing gas stations and grocery stores. He was a racist who had grown up in poverty in Missouri and blamed African Americans for his failures in life. Ray had escaped from Missouri State Penitentiary on April 23, 1967, and had been planning King's murder for months. Ray had stalked King across the country, from Los Angeles to Atlanta to Memphis. He rented a room in a flophouse across from the Lorraine Motel and waited for his opportunity. Using a Remington rifle he'd purchased in Alabama, Ray fired the fatal shot that struck King in the jaw and neck, severing his spinal cord. Within minutes, King was rushed to St. Joseph's Hospital, but the wound was fatal. At 7:05 p.m., America's greatest civil rights leader was pronounced dead. The news sparked riots in over 100 cities across America. Washington, D.C., Chicago, and Baltimore burned as African Americans expressed their rage and grief. Meanwhile, Ray fled to Canada, then to London, using fake passports and identities he had cultivated during his year on the run. But the FBI's massive investigation tracked him down, and he was arrested at London's Heathrow Airport on June 8, 1968, as he tried to board a plane to Brussels. Ray pleaded guilty to avoid the electric chair and was sentenced to 99 years in prison. But he soon recanted his confession, claiming he was part of a larger conspiracy. For the rest of his life, Ray insisted he was a patsy, set up by a mysterious figure named Raoul. The King family eventually came to believe Ray's claims, but most historians reject the conspiracy theories. Ray died in prison in 1998, still maintaining his innocence but never providing credible evidence of a broader plot. Gavrilo Princip. June 28, 1914. Sarajevo, Bosnia-Herzegovina. What started as a failed assassination attempt by a teenage Serbian nationalist would end up triggering the most devastating war in human history. The murder of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie by 19-year-old Gavrilo Princip lit the fuse that exploded into World War I, reshaping the entire world. Franz Ferdinand was heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, one of Europe's great powers. Unlike many in the Habsburg family, he was actually a reformer who wanted to give more rights to the empire's Slavic minorities. His marriage to Sophie, a Czech countess considered beneath his station, had caused a scandal at court. Their children were barred from succession, but Franz Ferdinand loved his wife deeply and insisted she accompany him on his official duties whenever possible. The Archduke's visit to Sarajevo was meant to inspect military exercises, but it was seen as a provocation by Serbian nationalists who wanted to unite all South Slavs under Serbian rule. Bosnia had been annexed by Austria-Hungary just 6 years earlier, and tensions were running high. Gavrilo Princip was the son of a Bosnian Serb peasant family, but he had big dreams of South Slavic independence. As a student in Belgrade, he had been recruited by the Black Hand, a Serbian terrorist organization that used the motto, "Union or Death." The group was backed by elements within Serbian military intelligence and was dedicated to creating a greater Serbia that would include Bosnia. The Black Hand sent Princip and 5 other young conspirators to Sarajevo, armed with bombs and pistols. They positioned themselves along the route of Franz Ferdinand's motorcade, planning to strike as the Archduke made his way through the city. The first assassination attempt failed spectacularly. Conspirator Nedeljko Kabranovic threw a bomb at Franz Ferdinand's car, but it bounced off and exploded under the following vehicle, wounding several people but leaving the Archduke unharmed. The other conspirators lost their nerve and failed to act as the motorcade sped away. Franz Ferdinand was furious but decided to visit the wounded in the hospital. However, his driver took a wrong turn onto Franz Joseph Street, right where Gavrilo Princip happened to be standing, dejected after the failed plot. Suddenly, the royal car was just 5 feet away from him, backing up and turning around. Princip couldn't believe his luck. He stepped forward, drew his Belgian-made pistol, and fired 2 shots. The first bullet struck Sophie in the abdomen. The second hit Franz Ferdinand in the neck, severing his jugular vein. Sophie died almost immediately, and Franz Ferdinand died within minutes, his last words reportedly being, "Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Live for our children." Princip was immediately tackled by bystanders and arrested. Being under 20, he couldn't receive the death penalty under Austrian law, so he was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He never lived to see his vision of South Slavic independence realized. Suffering from tuberculosis, he died in an Austrian prison in 1918, just months before the war ended and Yugoslavia was created. But Princip's bullets had unleashed forces beyond his imagination. Austria-Hungary blamed Serbia for the assassination and declared war. Russia backed Serbia, Germany backed Austria-Hungary, France backed Russia, and Britain entered when Germany invaded Belgium. Within weeks, all of Europe was at war in a conflict that would kill over 16 million people and destroy 4 empires. One teenager with a pistol had changed the course of world history. Nathuram Godse, January 30, 1948. New Delhi, India. As the sun set over a newly independent but tragically divided nation, Mahatma Gandhi walked through the gardens of Birla House toward his evening prayer meeting. The 78-year-old father of Indian independence had dedicated his life to nonviolence and truth, but he was about to fall victim to the very hatred and religious extremism he had spent decades fighting against. Gandhi was heartbroken. The independence he had dreamed of for decades had finally come, but at a terrible price. India had been partitioned into Hindu-majority India and Muslim-majority Pakistan, triggering massive population transfers and horrific communal violence that killed hundreds of thousands. Gandhi had opposed partition, believing that Hindus and Muslims could live together in peace, but he had been overruled by other Indian leaders. Now, in the final months of his life, Gandhi was desperately trying to heal the wounds. He had fasted to stop riots in Calcutta and Delhi, putting his own life on the line to promote peace between the communities. But his efforts to protect Muslims and promote reconciliation had made him enemies among Hindu extremists who saw him as a traitor to his own religion. Nathuram Godse was one of those extremists. A member of the Hindu nationalist organization Rashtriya Swayamsevak Sangh, RSS, Godse believed that Gandhi's policies were weakening India and favoring Muslims at the expense of Hindus. He was particularly enraged by Gandhi's decision to include readings from the Quran in his prayer meetings and his efforts to ensure that Pakistan received its share of financial assets from the British colonial government. Godse was a Brahmin from Maharashtra who had started as a Gandhi supporter but had become increasingly radicalized by Hindu nationalist ideology. He edited a Marathi-language newspaper that promoted Hindu supremacy and opposed Gandhi's inclusive vision of Indian nationalism. To Godse and his conspirators, Gandhi was not a saint but a dangerous appeaser who was betraying Hindu interests. On that fateful evening, Gandhi was running late for his prayer meeting. Supported by his grandnieces Abba and Manu, the frail leader made his way through the garden as a crowd of about 1,000 people waited for him. Godse stood in the crowd, his hands pressed together in the traditional Indian greeting, concealing a Beretta pistol. As Gandhi approached, Godse stepped forward as if to touch the Mahatma's feet in respect. Then, at point-blank range, he fired 3 shots into Gandhi's chest. Gandhi's last words were, "He Ram, O God," and he died within minutes. The crowd immediately seized Godse, but he made no attempt to escape. In fact, he seemed proud of what he had done. "I have done my duty," he reportedly said. "Now you can do yours." At his trial, Godse gave a lengthy speech defending his actions, arguing that Gandhi's policies had led to the partition of India and the deaths of countless Hindus. Godse and his co-conspirator Narayan Apte were sentenced to death and executed on November 15, 1949. 6 other conspirators received life sentences. Godse went to his death unrepentant, believing he had saved India from Gandhi's dangerous policies. The assassination shocked the world and devastated India. Prime Minister Nehru announced Gandhi's death to the nation with the words, "The light has gone out of our lives and there is darkness everywhere." Millions participated in Gandhi's funeral procession, and his death helped calm the communal tensions that had been tearing the country apart. Ironically, Gandhi's martyrdom accomplished what his life's work had struggled to achieve. It unified India in grief and reminded the nation of its commitment to nonviolence and secularism. The man who killed Gandhi to save Hindu India had actually strengthened the very values he opposed. Leon Zalgas. September 6, 1901. Buffalo, New York. The Pan American Exposition was celebrating American progress and prosperity, and President William McKinley was there to shake hands with admirers and deliver a speech about America's growing role in the world. But lurking in the crowd was Leon Zalgas, a disturbed anarchist who saw the president not as a symbol of progress but as an enemy of working people everywhere. William McKinley was America's 25th president and a symbol of the nation's emergence as a global power. Under his leadership, America had defeated Spain in 1898, acquiring Puerto Rico, Guam, and the Philippines. The country was prosperous, industrial production was booming, and McKinley had just been re-elected by a larger margin than in 1896. He seemed to embody American success at the dawn of the 20th century. But not everyone shared in that prosperity. The Gilded Age was also an era of extreme inequality, with robber barons amassing incredible fortunes while factory workers struggled in dangerous conditions for low wages. Labor unrest was common, and radical ideologies like anarchism attracted followers who believed that only violence could bring about social change. Leon Zalgas was one of those followers. Born to Polish immigrants in Michigan, he had worked in steel mills and glass factories, where he witnessed the harsh treatment of workers firsthand. Originally a supporter of mainstream politicians, Zalgas became radicalized after the economic depression of 1893 cost him his job and his savings. Zalgas was particularly influenced by the assassination of King Umberto I of Italy by anarchist Gaetano Bresci in 1900. He began attending anarchist meetings and reading radical literature. In his disturbed mind, he came to believe that killing McKinley would strike a blow for oppressed workers everywhere. On the day of the assassination, McKinley was holding a public reception at the Exposition's Temple of Music. Thousands of people waited in line to shake hands with the president, who was known for his friendly, accessible manner. Secret Service protection was minimal by today's standards, just 3 agents and some local police. Zalgas waited in line like any other visitor, his right hand wrapped in a handkerchief to conceal a .32 caliber Iver Johnson revolver. The weather was hot, and many people in the crowd were using handkerchiefs to wipe away sweat, so Zolgast's disguise didn't attract attention. When his turn came, Zolgast stepped forward as if to shake the president's hand. Instead, he pushed away McKinley's outstretched hand and fired 2 shots at point-blank range. The first bullet struck a button on McKinley's vest and was deflected, but the second entered his abdomen, tearing through his stomach, pancreas, and kidney. The crowd immediately jumped on Zolgast and began beating him savagely. McKinley, despite his wounds, reportedly called out, "Don't let them hurt him," showing the kind of character that had made him beloved by many Americans. McKinley was rushed to a hospital where doctors performed emergency surgery. For a week, it seemed he might recover. Bulletins from Buffalo were optimistic, and Vice President Theodore Roosevelt even went on vacation, believing the crisis had passed. But infection set in, and McKinley's condition deteriorated rapidly. On September 14, 8 days after the shooting, William McKinley died of blood poisoning. His last words were reportedly from his favorite hymn, "Nearer, my God, to Thee." Theodore Roosevelt, at age 42, became the youngest president in American history. Zolgast showed no remorse for his crime. He was quickly tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. Throughout his trial, he remained defiant, claiming he had killed McKinley because he was an enemy of the people. On October 29, 1901, just 45 days after the assassination, Zolgast was executed in the electric chair at Auburn State Prison. His last words were, "I killed the president because he was the enemy of the good people, the working people. I am not sorry for my crime." Charles J. Guiteau. July 2, 1881. Washington, D.C. President James A. Garfield was walking through the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad station, preparing to leave for a vacation with his wife, when 2 gunshots shattered the morning calm. The shooter was Charles J. Guiteau, a delusional office seeker who believed he deserved a government job and blamed the president for rejecting him. James Garfield had one of the most remarkable backgrounds of any American president. Born in a log cabin in Ohio, he had worked as a canal boat driver, taught himself Latin and Greek, and become a college president before entering politics. He was a Civil War hero, a gifted orator, and a self-made man who embodied the American dream. But his presidency would last just 200 days, making him the second shortest-serving president in American history. Garfield had the misfortune to lead the country during a bitter split in the Republican Party between the stalwarts, who supported the old patronage system, and the half-breeds, who wanted civil service reform. As a compromise candidate, Garfield tried to balance both factions, but this only created more enemies. The presidency was consuming him, and he desperately needed the vacation he was about to take. Charles Guiteau was a failed lawyer, failed preacher, and failed writer who drifted through life convinced that the world owed him success. He had joined a religious commune called the Oneida Community but was kicked out for being lazy and dishonest. He had tried practicing law in Chicago and New York but was so incompetent that he was laughed out of courtrooms. He had attempted to start a newspaper but failed miserably. When Garfield won the 1880 presidential election, Guiteau convinced himself that a speech he had written and delivered a few times, to tiny audiences, had been crucial to the victory. The speech, originally titled Grant versus Hancock, had been hastily revised to Garfield versus Hancock when Garfield became the nominee. Guiteau believed this entitled him to a major diplomatic post, preferably as ambassador to Austria or consul general in Paris. Guiteau bombarded the White House with letters demanding his reward and haunted the offices of government officials, pestering them for a job. His behavior was so erratic that he became known as a nuisance around Washington. When his demands were ignored, Guiteau's resentment grew into a murderous rage. In his twisted mind, Guiteau decided that killing Garfield would solve the Republican Party's problems by putting Vice President Chester Arthur, a stalwart, in the White House. He convinced himself that he was doing God's work and that the American people would thank him for his service. Guiteau stalked Garfield for weeks, learning his routines and waiting for the perfect opportunity. He bought a .44 caliber British Bulldog revolver, choosing an expensive model with an ivory handle because he thought it would look better in a museum someday. He even practiced shooting at the banks of the Potomac River. On the morning of July 2nd, Gutierrez knew Garfield would be at the railroad station leaving for his vacation. He arrived early and waited for the president in the station's ladies' waiting room. When Garfield entered with Secretary of State James Blaine, Gutierrez stepped behind him and fired 2 shots. The first bullet grazed Garfield's arm, but the second lodged in his back, near his spine. Gutierrez was immediately arrested, reportedly shouting, "I am a stalwart. Arthur is now president." He seemed proud of his accomplishment and expected to be hailed as a hero by the stalwart faction. But Garfield didn't die immediately. For 80 excruciating days, the president lingered between life and death while the nation watched and prayed. Doctors probed his wound with dirty fingers and instruments, causing massive infections. Alexander Graham Bell even invented a metal detector to try to find the bullet, but doctors' incompetence made his efforts useless. Garfield finally died on September 19, 1881, probably more from his doctor's treatment than from Gutierrez's bullets. The public's grief was immense. Some historians argue that mourning for Garfield exceeded even the reaction to Lincoln's death. Gutierrez was tried for murder and conducted his own defense, acting so bizarrely that spectators came to watch him as entertainment. He claimed divine inspiration and argued that the doctors, not he, had killed Garfield. On June 30, 1882, Charles Gutierrez was hanged, going to his death still convinced he was a misunderstood patriot. Sikh bodyguards and Tamil tigers. October 31, 1984. New Delhi, India. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi walked through her garden toward her office, as she had done countless times before. But this morning would be different. As she passed 2 of her trusted Sikh bodyguards, they opened fire with their service weapons, pumping 31 bullets into the woman who had dominated Indian politics for nearly 2 decades. Indira Gandhi was one of the most powerful women in world history. The daughter of India's first Prime Minister, Jawaharlal Nehru, she had led India through 4 terms as Prime Minister, from 1966 to 1977 and again from 1980 until her death. She was known as the Iron Lady of India, a tough leader who had split Pakistan in 2 during the 1971 war, creating Bangladesh, and who had imposed emergency rule to maintain power during the 1970s. But by 1984, Gandhi faced her greatest challenge yet. Sikh separatists in Punjab were demanding an independent homeland called Khalistan, and their movement had turned increasingly violent. The situation came to a head when militants occupied the Golden Temple in Amritsar, the holiest site in Sikhism, and turned it into an armed fortress. Gandhi made the fateful decision to order Operation Blue Star, a military assault on the Golden Temple in June 1984. The operation succeeded in removing the militants, but at a terrible cost. At least 450 people died, including many pilgrims, and the temple complex was severely damaged. Sikhs around the world were outraged by what they saw as a desecration of their most sacred place. Gandhi's Sikh bodyguards, Bent Singh and Satwant Singh, were among those seeking revenge. On that October morning, as Gandhi walked to meet British actor Peter Ustinov for a television interview, Bent Singh shot her with his service revolver. When she fell, Satwant Singh emptied his Sten gun into her body. Other security guards immediately shot and killed Bent Singh, while Satwant Singh was captured alive. Gandhi was rushed to the hospital but died within hours. The assassination triggered massive anti-Sikh riots across India, with thousands of innocent Sikhs killed by angry mobs. Her son Rajiv was immediately sworn in as Prime Minister, beginning what many hoped would be a healing process for the nation. Rajiv Gandhi was supposed to be different from his mother, younger, more moderate, and focused on modernizing India through technology and economic reform. Unlike his politically ambitious younger brother Sanjay, who had died in a plane crash in 1980, Rajiv had been content to work as a pilot for Indian Airlines and stay out of politics. But his mother's death thrust him into leadership of both the Congress Party and the country. Rajiv led the Congress Party to a massive electoral victory in 1984, winning the largest majority in Indian parliamentary history. He promised to clean up corruption, modernize the economy, and heal India's ethnic divisions. For a while, it seemed like he might succeed. He reached peace agreements with separatist groups in Punjab and Assam and began opening India's economy to foreign investment. But Rajiv's administration soon became mired in scandal, particularly the Bofors arms deal controversy, where he was accused of taking kickbacks from Swedish weapons manufacturers. His attempts to manage ethnic conflicts in Punjab and Kashmir backfired, and his popularity plummeted. He lost power in 1989 but remained leader of the Congress Party. It was during the 1991 election campaign that Rajiv's past caught up with him. In 1987, he had sent Indian peacekeeping forces to Sri Lanka to help end that country's civil war between the government and Tamil separatists known as the Tamil Tigers, LTT. The mission was a disaster. The Indian troops ended up fighting the very Tamil rebels they were supposed to protect, and nearly 1,200 Indian soldiers died before the forces were withdrawn in 1990. The Tamil Tigers never forgave Rajiv for this intervention. On May 21, 1991, while campaigning in Tamil Nadu state, Rajiv was greeting supporters in the town of Sriperumbudur when a young woman named Thenmosi Rajaratnam approached him with a garland of flowers. Hidden in the flowers was a bomb containing 700 grams of RDX explosive and 2,000 steel balls. As Rajiv bent down to receive the garland, Rajaratnam detonated the suicide bomb, killing herself, Rajiv, and 16 others instantly. The blast was so powerful that it scattered body parts over a wide area. Rajiv was identified only by his shoes. The assassination was planned and executed by the Tamil Tigers as revenge for the Indian intervention in Sri Lanka. In 1998, an Indian court convicted 26 people in the conspiracy, including several Tamil militants and their Indian supporters. The death of Rajiv Gandhi marked the end of the Nehru-Gandhi dynasty that had dominated Indian politics for decades and sent shockwaves throughout the world. 2 generations of India's most powerful political family had now fallen to assassins, victims of the very ethnic and religious tensions they had struggled to manage in their vast and diverse nation. Thanks for watching this video to the end. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. We will love to know the country you are watching from in the comments section, and if you have any video ideas that you will love us to work on, don't hesitate to drop it in the comments section. See you soon in our next videos.